When you think about trying to marry that operational data with the experiential data that's out there, right? We've had one kind of currency, right, that helps to define what an impression is in television, and then the agencies go out and price that CPM basis across cable and broadcast, and then digital impressions. But an impression is not an impression, it's not an impression, right? And ultimately, when the marketer gets the opportunity to be out in front of a brand, right, to be out in front of an audience and talk about their brand, right, ultimately, they're trying to have an impact. And how you measure that impact, an impression on Facebook versus an impression on broadcast television versus an impression on iHeartRadio, how you measure that emotional impact and qualify that impression is very difficult.
You know, I've got 75 slides to go through here. Next one. So this Pythagorean good-evil divide was related to a broader split in Greek culture between mind and body, between virtual symbols and physical realities, between the message and the medium. So Plato took the split to its logical conclusion with his theory of form. So he said that a chair like this one is a sort of imperfect realization of the chair form, which exists on a higher abstract plane. And numbers and mathematical equations live in the world of forms, but we don't, or at least our bodies don't. We live in the real world. So what does this have to do with coins? Well, the production of coins by stamping a metal blank can be seen as the physical manifestation of this duality. It's a bit like Greek duality in your pocket. So the stamp represents the abstract world of virtual forms, while the metal represents the material body. So the stamp is forced into the material body. And the virtual number aspect of money obeys mathematical rules and exists outside of time and space, it's like in the world of forms. But the physical aspect represents material wealth, something that is owned in the real world. So these sides cannot be separated. Gold is not really money unless it has a number stamped on it, and even bitcoins are physically possessed on a hard drive. And this is shown graphically by anyone who loses their computer hard drive, which happens to have a Bitcoin wallet on it. They get very upset.
The thing, the elephant in the room is when the business model is capturing your attention, where the stock price is directly tied to how many minutes can I mine from your brain, how many user accounts can I tell Wall Street. When, last year or 2 years ago, 17% of Twitter's users were bots. They were fake accounts. And a bunch of them were the Russian bots, and they couldn't take them down because their stock price was directly tied to how many users they've been telling Wall Street. And when they actually did last year shut down 70 million accounts, they got punished by Wall Street instead of getting rewarded by Wall Street. So we're in a situation where there's a double bind where the very thing that's propping up the revenue, per your point about the data, they can't escape this business model, is the fundamental coupling that we have to undo.
As we've seen, so money mediates between number and the real world, but these two things are in tension, and this feeds through to market. So price is maybe an exact number, but real world value is an inherently fuzzy, transient and uncertain concept, and it's the gap between these two aspects, kind of incompatibility. And therefore the behavior of money in markets is dominated by nonlinear effects, network contagion, investor psychology, power relations, and so on. Basically all these things that we've been leaving out of mainstream economics, but are now being brought back in through areas such as complexity science, network theory, and so-called heterodox economics, areas such as behavioral economics, ecological economics, and so on. So the main thing is that money is an active medium with these sort of acoustic properties, to use McLuhan's phrase, and this is the real reason that markets are hard to predict rather than anything to do with efficiency.
So attention is the finite resource. We used to think that information was the competitive resource. Who has more information? But now we have infinite information. We have abundant access to information, so that's not the cognitive, that's not where you get that advantage. What really matters now is attention is the thing that all information has to get shrunk down to fit into. And so the issue with the things that tech companies are trying to solve with shadow banning is right now, if I told you, Alex Jones of InfoWars got recommended 15 billion times by YouTube. 15 billion times. So when, and the same thing is true with this outrage magnifier, right? So if you get more amplitude from just adding moral outrage to your tweets, that starts to take up more and more of the airwaves. So what we have to deal with, and this is unprecedented territory. I'm not saying this is easy, there's an answer, like, oh, it's so easy, we just shadow ban these guys. I'm saying this is a new era where we need to rewrite. Free speech is actually an inadequate framing of the problem in a world where there's finite attention.
So since the 1970s, our current era, fiat currencies are completely virtual. Right? You just press the button, banks. And yet appearances are maintained so that superficially they look the same as they were under the gold standard, except without the gold. So behind the US dollar, you still have the Federal Reserve, and you still have it's got vaults of gold underneath Manhattan, and Fort Knox has got its vaults of gold. But the thing is now, everything is exactly the same, except that the gold no longer plays any role. It doesn't connect with the monetary system. So there's this thing that money is in transition, but it hasn't kind of made the transition yet. It's just part way through. And you can see that in our kind of conflicted attitude towards some of the things that are going on. So for example, this idea of quantitative easing, which is sort of a typical kind of a central banking term, which is deliberately chosen to be completely baffling. I don't know what non-quantitative easing would be, or what is being eased, but nonetheless, governments have undertaken these risky quantitative easing programs, which involve using made-up money to buy bonds from private institutions. And the idea is to sort of boost the economy in this very top-down fashion. So you put the money in at the top, and the idea is that it sort of filters through to the bottom.
How do we make that decision? If somebody has to have the ultimate responsibility for how things operate, based on your decades of work, if you had to trust one person or one organization, who would you trust?
None. That's the answer. The real answer is, how do we create a highly distributed polycentric governance model that does not have a center of control? Because that's what caused the problem in the first place.
Speaking about private banks, why is it that they still effectively control money creation? And I think this is a big one, because under the gold standard, they had a clear role, because basically the way that all got started was that the Bank of England was formed when it rescued the sovereign by lending money, by lending gold. The reason was the king was too big to fail, right? So they had to give him money to keep the show on the road. But now, it's the government that has to rescue the banks, so it's the other way around.